Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into how modern, cutting-edge science is literally rewriting the history of impossible cold cases. For generations, we all kind of assumed that if enough time passed, a mystery would just fade into the dark. The prevailing wisdom was that trails go cold, physical evidence eventually turns to dust, and answers are permanently lost to history. But we're actually living through a biological reckoning right now. It's this incredible period where the unsolvable is finally being solved. Technology has essentially caught up with the past, giving investigators the tools to reach back through the decades and pull answers right out of thin air. And this brings us to a really fascinating point. For decades, these killers were treated as ghosts who left no trace. Just imagine working a case for 30 or 40 agonizing years and feeling like your suspect never actually existed in the physical world. Law enforcement, and honestly the public too, had to grapple with perpetrators who seemed to just strike and then completely vanish. It created this terrifying mythos around these figures. There was a genuine, lingering belief that they had somehow outsmarted reality itself, operating entirely outside the bounds of traditional forensics.
So let's move to Section 1, Chasing Ghosts, the Unsolvable Mysteries.
Now, let's look at a couple of categorical cold cases that perfectly illustrate this. We're talking about notorious figures like the Freeway Phantom, who haunted the Washington, D.C. area in the early 1970s, and the Doodler, who targeted the LGBTQ+ community in 70s San Francisco. For the investigators assigned to these devastating sprees, they were literally chasing shadows. Year after year, the leads just dried up. Despite thousands of hours of intense police work, these perpetrators slipped completely through the cracks of 20th century investigative techniques. And sadly, that left behind decades of pain and unanswered questions for the families involved.
But here's the thing. These ghosts didn't actually evaporate. They were human, and humans fundamentally cannot move through the world without interacting with their environment. The missing trace was actually always there. It might have been hidden in plain sight as a microscopic, invisible strand of DNA left on a collar, or even a highly specific grammatical choice written on a piece of paper. The evidence was perfectly preserved in time. It was simply waiting for the right scientific key to unlock it.
That brings us to Section 2, the DNA Time Machine, Reconstructing History.
So in the past, an unmatched DNA sample was just a hugely frustrating dead end. If you had the biological profile, but the person wasn't already in a criminal database, you had absolutely nowhere to go. But now we have DNA phenotyping. This is a forensic technique that reconstructs a killer's family tree from decades-old biological evidence. And let me tell you, it's a complete paradigm shift. It's no longer just about matching a suspect directly to a sample. Now it's about reverse engineering that sample to identify exactly who a suspect's great-grandparents were, which opens up this sprawling, massive map of potential relatives. Look at how this builds step by step. Step 1, you start with decades-old evidence. Maybe it's a tiny, degraded scrap of fabric that's just been sitting in a forgotten evidence locker since the 1970s. Then, step 2 is DNA extraction. Modern extraction pulls a robust profile that older technology simply couldn't even see. And finally, step 3, reconstructing the family tree. This takes investigators directly from a cold crime scene right to the doorstep of a suspect's distant relatives. By tracking things like census records, marriage certificates, and public genealogical databases, investigators can narrow down the search geographically and temporally. The ghost suddenly becomes flesh and blood again, anchored to a specific family in a specific town at a very specific moment in time.
All right, let's shift gears a bit for Section 3, the telltale word, linguistic fingerprints.
Now, I want you to think about a rare word like tantamount. Most people just don't use a word like that in casual conversation, or even in standard correspondence, right? Our vocabulary is profoundly shaped by our specific education, the region we grew up in, and the era we lived in. So if a perpetrator uses a highly specific linguistic quirk like this in a taunting letter or a manifesto, they aren't just communicating a message. They are inadvertently leaving behind a huge piece of their identity. It's basically a trail of breadcrumbs based entirely on their vocabulary.
And this is exactly what forensic linguistics is all about. It's the scientific analysis of language and rare vocabulary to reveal a person's true identity. We all have a unique cadence, preferred grammatical habits, and subconscious little tics in how we structure our sentences. Well, forensic linguists treat these behavioral habits exactly like a physical trace left at a crime scene. And when you combine this highly sophisticated linguistic profiling with the cutting-edge biological profiling we just talked about, wow,
You're attacking the mystery from two completely different angles, and the net around these historical phantoms tightens incredibly fast.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 4, the biological reckoning, a new paradigm.
Bringing this all together, we really have to completely reframe our worldview. For generations, society and even law enforcement believed in the perfect crime. The idea of a permanent, successful escape from justice. But science has forced a massive shift in how we look at this. The perfect crime doesn't actually exist. It is merely delayed detection. The biological and linguistic records were always there, just silently waiting in those dusty evidence boxes. The timeline of justice just had to be stretched out until our technology finally arrived to read that record.
So, this brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. Can any secret truly stay hidden in our modern biological age? I'll leave you with that provocative thought. Ask yourself if anyone can ever really vanish, when our very words, our syntax, and our DNA serve as permanent, unalterable records of our existence in the world. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what we think is impossible.